Jerry Dipoto spoke with the media on Monday. Take a wild guess how that went. Let's talk about it. Colby, hit it.
You are Locked On Mariners, your daily Seattle Mariners podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Ahoy, sailors. It is Wednesday, February 5th, 2025. This is Ty Gonzalez and Colby Patnode for the Locked On Mariners podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On today's show, Jerry Dipoto spoke with the media Monday afternoon. There were a couple important notes about the bullpen that we'll go over, but he also had some things to say about this quiet offseason and the Mariners offense that weren't, let's say, great. So we're going to talk about all that, plus some Nico Hoerner as well. But before we do, quick shout out to our title sponsor today, Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONMLB. That's LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. And if you want to hear from me and Colby even more and help support the show, check out our Patreon. All you have to do to check that out is click the link in the description of this episode. So let's just hop right into it. Let's get into the big quote from Jerry Dipoto's media gathering on Monday, which was via Zoom. This quote is making the rounds on social media, or has been making the rounds over the last couple of days. This is courtesy of Adam Jude. The quote says, "I think there's the reality of our offense and then the perception of our offense. We play in a tough ballpark to hit in. Our offense has generally been above average based on advanced metrics, WRC plus, things like that, for a number of years now. The last 3 years, we've actually had a very stable offense, particularly good on the road. I think one of the top 10 in MLB when we're on the road. And at home, we play in a tough run scoring environment that really benefits our pitching staff, and position players have been asked to find ways, and we've generally done that. We've turned it into one of the best home records. We have a good offensive team, and we didn't feel like we needed to do a whole lot but to find ways to support the group that we had. And I know the offseason has been long and seemingly slow. We feel, and I said this at season's end, we do feel like we made a lot of progress late last year." So a lot to unpack here. Let's first talk about what he said about the offense, particularly over the last 3 years. Okay, yes, your offense has been top 10 in WRC plus over the last 3 years. I believe both on the road and at home. But why should I care about what this offense looked like 2 years ago? Why should I care what it looked like in 2023? I mean, that 2022 team, Colby, correct me if I'm wrong, there's only 5 guys left from that offense. And one of them left for a year and then came back. That's Mitch Haniger. The others are Julio, Cal Raleigh, JP Crawford, Dylan Moore. I think that's it. So why should I care about that? Why should I care about the 2023 offense? The only offense that I care about right now is what the 2024 offense did. And the 2024 offense got 3 people fired last year. And the only reason that I care about that offense is because you're trying to run it back with that offense, essentially, this upcoming season. You brought back Jorge Polanco. You're essentially hoping that Donovan Solano is just what Justin Turner gave you in the second half. That's it. That's all you've done this offseason. Everyone else, except for Josh Rojas, is coming back. And Justin Turner, right? But again, you're trying to essentially replicate Turner. Mm-hmm. So, Colby, you hear that quote from Jerry. What goes through your mind?
It's frustrating that Jerry is trying to present a reality that is not a reality that we all watched play out for a majority of last year. It's the definition of gaslighting. He is trying to make us believe the version of events that he wants us to believe. And it's just not true, Jerry. Like, yeah, the offense was pretty good for the last 5 weeks of last year. I guess the other 21 weeks doesn't matter because the last 5 weeks were good. And Jerry, if you had a top 10 offense last year, probably would have been in the playoffs with your pitching. even with the bullpen struggles, you're probably in the playoffs with a top 10 offense last year. So you're saying your starting pitching wasn't good enough?
By the way, I want to add another thing, right? He wants to talk about WRC plus, right? Well, WRC plus is obviously going to be more favorable to you. You're going to have more leash because you play 81 games in the most offensive suppressive ballpark in the entire sport.
Right. It's, if you play in an extreme hitters ballpark, WRC plus isn't going to be kind to you. It works the opposite way too. If you play in an extreme pitchers ballpark, WRC plus is going to be a little bit more kind to you. So yeah, it's just one of those things where it's like Jerry wants us to believe that what we all witnessed last year wasn't actually what we saw. It's an illusion, and that he's just going to fix it, and that we actually don't know what we're talking about. Like, it comes off very condescending, very mansplaining type of stuff, where it's like, you guys don't get it. Let me explain it for you so that you guys can I'll dumb it down for you so you guys can understand. And it just comes off as, it's like, we get the frustration that Jerry must be feeling right now because they were set up to fail. We talked about this all winter. They were set up to fail this winter, but they still did. They still failed. And this is the first winter where it just seemed like they lacked any creativity. They lacked any aggression. And they fell flat on their face, and they obviously misjudged the market again. And this just feels like Jerry is desperately trying to walk back and try and like Monday morning quarterback the offseason after he failed in it and try to make himself look good. And nobody's buying it, Jerry. We're not stupid. So it's just, it comes off as disingenuous and just kind of like a big lie, and nobody's interested in hearing it.
Yeah, the downplaying of the off season and the needs that they have is especially just disingenuous. Straight up. Like, Colby, you and I, we're not super connected, but we're connected. We heard some things this offseason. We know what the Mariners were trying to accomplish, particularly around the winter meetings. We know that they were trying to get bigger and better things done. And they were trying to add impact. Like, they were trying to add Nico Hoerner. They were potentially trying to angle to turn Luis Castillo into Nico Hoerner and Christian Walker. Those names are significantly more impactful than Donovan Solano and Jorge Polanco. So this idea that, our needs weren't even that great is a lie, because we know that you tried to go out and add more impact. We know that you essentially acknowledge the fact that your roster, as currently constructed, or at the time when it was constructed, in December, wasn't good enough. And frankly, Donovan Solano and Jorge Polanco barely move the needle. And I'm a bit more optimistic than others, at least about the bat of Jorge Polanco. And we all know that I really like Donovan Solano, but let's be realistic here. Those guys, again, barely move the needle for you from where you were. You are essentially in the same spot that you were in at the end of the 2024 season with this offense. So look, I get it. I know he has to spend this. We all expected it. It's part of his job. I can live with it. I don't have to like it, but I can live with that. That he has to spend this. And obviously he's not going to badmouth ownership. He's not going to trash the players that he did wind up bringing in. He's not going to trash the roster that they have in place. He's obviously not going to do anything like that. And nor should we expect him to do anything like that or hold him to that kind of standard, because that's just the name of the game. Every GM in baseball is going to do the same thing that essentially Jerry Dipoto did on Monday. However, you would hope that at least some of them would read the room a little bit better than Jerry did on Monday. Jerry, obviously not particularly good at reading the room. But you would think, especially since the 54% press conference, which has led him to not speak to the media nearly as much as he used to, you would think that that would maybe, teach him a lesson or two about how to address the fan base. and maybe even, you know, take some subtle shots at ownership or whatever. But no, again, it's this condescending tone that basically comes off as, well, you guys just don't get it. Our offense is actually, it's been pretty good over the last 3 years. Again, who cares what this offense looked like in 2022 and 2023? And the offense that we saw in 2024, abysmal. It was certainly better after the trade deadline. It was better after Scott Service was fired. And it does seem like they are banking a lot on the offensive issues being a coaching issue, and that they've rectified that by, you know, bringing in Edgar and hiring Kevin Seitzer and Bobby Magallanes. But still, I know a lot of you are typing away at me like going, well, what is he supposed to say? First and foremost, not that. Not what he said. Not in the way that he said it. If I was Jerry, I would just go, look, there were some avenues that we tried to go down. We fell short. And the trade market didn't align in a way that we felt was favorable for our organization. But we feel good about the players that we did bring in, and we feel good about where our roster is. And he did say some of that. But again, you can eliminate the condescending tone, the whole like, well, you should actually, you know, give the offense credit where credit is due and all that stuff. You can eliminate that. Be a bit more honest. And look, you're still going to get criticized for it, but that's a lot better than what you said on Monday. It is. It's plain and simple. Because, I mean, look at this quote from Ryan Divish. Or, you know, via Ryan Divish. This is from Jerry, of course. Quote, "It's been a pretty quiet offseason, and I think that's reflective of a team that didn't have a whole lot of holes to fill. And, you know, we feel great about our farm system. We feel great about the stability in our team, and we feel like our offense doesn't get enough credit for the things that they do well." What did the 2024 offense do well? Look, they were pretty good in the final 6 weeks of the season. I'll give them that. Sure. Like Victor Robles had a great year. Cal Raleigh had a great year. Sure. Yes. But in general, on the whole, what the 2024 Mariners offense was best at, frankly, was getting people fired. So that's all I have on that. At the very least, the Band-Aid has been ripped off of them ultimately spinning this. Now I'm at the point where, hey, let's just get into the games. I'm tired of talking about this offseason. I'm tired of talking about this front office and this ownership group. I just want to watch some baseball. So let's get into some of the actual baseball things that Jerry had to say on Monday. Only a couple, particularly about the bullpen. Get into that in just a moment. But first, a reminder, this episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast is brought to you by Prize Picks. The big game is almost here, and there's no better way to make it even more exciting than with Prize Picks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With over 10 million members and billions of winnings awarded, Prize Picks makes it fun and simple to get in on the action. Here's how it works. You pick more or less on at least two players' projections, and if you're right, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. Prize Picks even has a free pick for the big game where Patrick Mahomes only needs to throw 1 yard to win. Pair that with one more correct pick, and you're cashing out. Check out the promos tab to tail any of the super sweet Millie Winners big game lineups. If you tail a lineup that goes 3 for 3, you can win a split of $1 million in promo funds. Download the app today and use the promo code LOCKEDONMLB to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's promo code LOCKEDONMLB for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. And you're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. So we've talked a lot about the bullpen this offseason. The Mariners have put together an interesting pile of minor league arms, but they haven't acquired a major league reliever this offseason so far. That need, and we feel that it is a pretty great need, we've talked about this a lot, has only become greater now with the news from Jerry on Monday that Troy Taylor suffered a lat strain during his offseason workouts and will not be ready for spring training. So, look, you might be done adding position players, but you need to get on the phone and get yourself a major league reliever, like an actual established dude. There's quite a few of them down in Miami that I think you should go after. But, like, look, you're probably going to develop a guy or two out of thin air from this pile of arms that you have. Sure, because you've done it pretty much every single year. I'll give you that. But it would be nice for them to do essentially what they did last year when they went out and got Gregory Santos and they got Ryan Stanek. Go out and get yourself an actual established dude. Now, obviously, Santos and Stanek didn't work out great last year, but that doesn't mean you should, not try again. All right. So, Colby, I know you have your eye on Miami. You want to talk about some of those guys or anyone else that might be, available?
Yeah. There's 4 or 5 guys in that bullpen that makes sense, and all of them are making less than $2 million, so you should be able to afford them. There's Calvin Fauché. I believe you pronounce it Fauché.
It is Fauché. Yeah.
Yeah, he throws a lot of cutters. Coming off a pretty good year. Andrew Nardi's the big swing and miss guy, lefty, but ended the season on the IL with some elbow issues, so little sketchy there.
He's a pre-arb lefty who strikes guys out. Like the Marlins are going to probably ask for something pretty significant there.
Anthony Bender is the veteran of the group. Pretty good reliever. More of a 7th inning type of guy, but you could definitely use some of that in your bullpen and could work into some high leverage spots as well. Those are kind of the 3 big ones. And there's is it Tinoco?
Jesus Tinoco.
Yeah. He's a pretty interesting arm as well. So there are actually quite a few guys in that Marlins bullpen that make a lot of sense. And the Marlins are a team that are taking prospects, and they don't need a good bullpen. They're going to lose 100 games.
No.
So
at some point, they're going to trade from that bullpen. It's either going to be this offseason or at the deadline.
Mm-hmm.
So why not expedite that a little bit with them?
Right. Yep. It's a no-brainer to me. Give Miami a call and get yourself a reliever, and obviously the better reliever you can get. It's one less thing you have to worry about in July, because at some point the Mariners are going to have to add to their bullpen one way or another.
Mm. Additionally, Dipoto said that they are still optimistic that Matt Brash will be back and ready for games by late April. He has yet to suffer any setbacks in his recovery. So we talked about this before. That is a very optimistic timeline for a guy that's coming off of the injury and surgery that he is. He's not even a full year removed from that. This also interestingly contradicts what Dan Wilson said on the radio a couple days ago, that Wilson expects Brash back by mid-season. Now, mid-season could be a lot of different things. That could be June. That could be the All-Star break. But I think it's safe to assume that that's later than late April, right? So I don't know if that's necessarily concerning, but it's certainly noteworthy that Wilson and Dipoto are not lining up on what Brash's actual timeline is. But even if Brash gets back by late April, and hey, I'm rooting for him to be back by late April, that would be awesome. That would be great for him. But if he is back, or really, whenever he gets back, even if it is at the All-Star break, still have to worry about what he's going to look like coming off of the surgery, coming off of the injury. And again, it's still going to be a very violent delivery, so there's always going to be the risk of re-injury. Just feels like, and this ties into the conversation that we just had about going out and getting another reliever, it just feels like they're banking a lot on Brash coming back, staying healthy, and being good, and being essentially Matt Brash again right out of the gate.
Yeah. It's way too optimistic for my liking. The bullpen is incredibly important, and it's particularly important when the offense is going to be below average when it comes to scoring runs. Some of it because the offense just isn't that good. Some of it is because of the ballpark they play in. So you're going to be in a lot of low scoring games, particularly at T-Mobile Park. And, your offense isn't a team that's typically going to, put a lot of hits together and score multiple runs against other teams' best relievers. So yeah, a shutdown bullpen is pretty critical to the Mariners. And so, just counting on Matt Brash to come back less than a year, or about almost exactly a year to the day after he had this major surgery, and be good right away. And that's not counting, he's probably going to have a limited pitch count. He's probably not going to be able to go back-to-back days for a couple months. Like that you're banking a lot on Matt Brash and his elbow. And that's a pretty scary proposition.
Yeah. So again, I would feel a lot better if the Mariners got on the phone and talked to the Marlins, or really anyone else who is looking to trade an established major league reliever. I would have liked to see them, to have seen them in on the Ryan Brazier thing, but Brazier wound up going to the Cubs. But yeah, I would feel a lot more confident in this bullpen if they just had one more kind of like 6th, 7th inning guy in tow to go along with what they have. And I'm fairly optimistic about what they're going to get out of, Gregory Santos, and, we'll see if Colin Snyder can do it again. And obviously Andres Munoz is a dog, but I've said this, before, like, I'd really like for them not to put as much on Andres Munoz's shoulders as they did last year. I mean, for frick's sake, they asked the guy to throw a 5-out save in the second game of the season. It's insane. So I would like for them to take at least a little bit off of his plate this upcoming season. And the way that I think that they're going to do that is by bringing in a guy that's not in the organization right now. And again, I believe in their ability to develop, another guy out of thin air. Maybe that's Adonis Medina. Maybe they finally get Shintaro Fujinami to throw strikes, or Will Klein, or whoever. But you can go out and add a guy for a couple $1,000,000 on top of that. And hey, if you get that guy and you also hit on a Fujinami or someone like that, awesome. Great. Cool.
Yeah. It's one thing that I was looking into the other day. There's a leverage index that FanGraphs uses that essentially puts in a value about how, high a leverage situation is. One is considered average. Like, that's just an average leverage spot. Below one is low leverage, and then every point you go above is higher leverage. Munoz led the league in average leverage index at a little bit over 2. So nobody else was over 2, and Munoz was at like 2.08. So Andres, not only did he get used a lot last year, basically every single time he went in there, like one mistake and he would lose the game. So, taking that off of his plate a little bit too, having somebody else who can handle that. Who was second on the Mariners in leverage index last year?
Snyder?
Ryan Stanek. That didn't go well.
Yeah.
You need to do better. Santos is throwing. He's in Arizona already. He's 100% healthy, so hopefully he can take some of that off your plate, but you need somebody else too.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, there's some rumblings out there that Alex Bregman might be close to signing. And, we heard Astros GM Dana Brown speak about Bregman in the past tense yesterday. So it seems that maybe that ship has sailed. Seems like maybe the Red Sox have shifted their attention to Nolan Arenado. So process of elimination here. It's looking like maybe the Cubs, maybe the Tigers. There was a report yesterday that the Cubs have made some sort of offer, like a 4-year offer to Bregman, and they're trying to get that done here in the next couple days. So could that make Nico Hoerner available? Let's talk about it in just a moment. But first, a reminder, this episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast is once again brought to you by Gametime. So I used to live in New Mexico, and down in New Mexico, there are 0 pro sports teams, and a lot of bands and artists that I listen to skip going there more often than not. So when I moved to Toronto, where there's a baseball team, a basketball team, a hockey team, even a soccer team, and there's great music being played every night in the city, I was right in my element. When I want to catch a ball game, or my wife and I want to see a band, I always get my tickets through Gametime. And that was the case well before Gametime sponsored our network and before I even joined the network, because it is truly the best ticketing service out there, hands down. I truly, truly believe that. And now it's getting even better thanks to Gametime Picks. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. I can just go on the app, it'll show me the best deal right away, it'll show me the exact view I'll have, and most importantly, it'll tell me exactly what I'm going to pay with Gametime's all-in pricing, so there are no annoying little fees that pop up at the last second. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONMLB, that's LOCKEDONMLB, for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem promo code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. And you're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. Colby is feeling under the weather, so we're gonna try to get out of here pretty soon. But before we do, let's talk a little bit about Nico Hoerner. So amongst all of those quotes from Jerry Dipoto, there was another one that kind of stood out. He said, "We did have some conversation around our pitchers, particularly when there were so many phone calls coming in right around the time of the winter meetings. But, it was always our desire to get to opening day with the 5. I wonder how that quote will age if Nico Hoerner is suddenly available here in the next couple of days. Because again, there are some rumblings that Alex Bregman might be heading to Chicago. And if that happens, we talked about this before they traded Isaac Paredes, that, they would like to get Matt Shaw some playing time in the infield. Maybe Nico Hoerner, who's not going to be ready for opening day, maybe he's available again. Apparently he was, or they were at least talking about him. Like, they actually got fairly deep into trade conversations on a deal that would have involved Luis Castillo going to Chicago and Nico Hoerner going to Seattle around the winter meetings. Then all of a sudden, Dana Brown says, "Hey, we're shopping Kyle Tucker." And then the Cubs were like, "Well, Kyle Tucker's better than Luis Castillo. Let's go do that." And then they traded Isaac Paredes for Tucker. And obviously that made Hoerner more important to them. But they signed Bregman. Okay, maybe they're willing to listen on Hoerner again. So there's obviously the question of, like, what would it take to get Hoerner? It's probably still Luis Castillo. That's probably the only way it works for the Mariners financially at this point. Mm-hmm. Because Hoerner is due $11.5 million this year. The other thing too is, like, the Cubs, who, their owner has outright talked about payroll and has had some interesting quotes about that. Would they be willing to add more payroll on top of adding Bregman for whatever they would potentially sign him for? Even though that Castillo would essentially be discounted because you're getting rid of the $11.5 million of Hoerner. A lot of questions there. But do you think that if Bregman signs with the Cubs, that maybe we're not past the Luis Castillo, Nico Hoerner saga, if you will?
I think the thing to consider here is who replaces Luis Castillo?
Javier Assad.
And then at that point, what are you adding to Castillo to get Assad thrown in there? And what are you going to do with the $14 million? Because there's really nobody left on the market. Now you could go trade for somebody and do that. So, yeah, I think if Bregman signs with the Cubs, which I still think is a little bit unlikely, but if it happens, then Hoerner probably is available. And I think the Mariners, this isn't a new, obsession with them. They've liked Hoerner for quite a few years now. And I do think that, I do wonder how much of trying to trade Castillo was to get some money so you could sign Walker and all that stuff. That was rumored right around the same time. It's interesting. Like, okay, let's say they say yes. And let's say, you have $10 million now that you didn't have before. And your infield's now set. You have Polanco at third. You have JP at short. You have Hoerner at second eventually. Do you go spend the money on a first baseman and kind of push Rayleigh to the DH spot? Do you is there a number 5? Is there still a starting pitcher out there that's only going to cost you about $10 million that you can go get? Do you spend it on a bullpen arm? Like how do you replace Castillo would still be my biggest concern. But I do think that, I do think that if Bregman were to sign with the Cubs and if that made Nico Hoerner available, I think the Mariners would be interested and they would go back to the Cubs and try and figure out a deal that would make sense. But like you said, I think it would almost have to include Castillo because the payroll alone makes it very difficult to land Hoerner as things sit right now, unless, John Stanton is willing to give Jerry an extra $8 to $10 million, and you could just trade prospects for Hoerner, which is what you should do. But I do think that they'll circle back if Bregman does indeed sign with the Cubs.
So Justin Hollander is on 710 Seattle Sports right now. Seeing some quotes coming out from that via Casey Bellin, good friend. Quote, I've been on my phone all morning, but I would anticipate that the roster going to spring training is mostly identical to what it looks like now. We also talked about the bullpen a couple of minutes ago, and Hollander had something to say about that. Quote, I feel great about the bullpen. I mostly feel great about the bullpen because Matt Brash is feeling great. Interesting. Yeah. Hey, you mentioned like what else would they do with the money that they would save from Castillo? The Orioles just signed Ramon Laureano. They signed Tyler O'Neill early in the offseason. They have, Colton Cowser and Cedric Mullins. Cedric Mullins could be a pretty good fit to essentially backfill that Luke Raley role if Raley is going to play most of his time at first base this year. Mm-hmm. Be essentially the Mariners' fourth outfielder. He's owed $8.75 million or something like that this season. So right now, as things stand financially, that wouldn't work for the Mariners. But if suddenly they get some money freed up, I mean, if they don't get a pitcher back in the trade, you would think that they would then use that money on a pitcher of some kind. I don't know who. But hey, if they get a pitcher back and they got some money to spend, Cedric Mullins could be fun. So I don't know. We'll see. Yeah. I know, other people are talking about like Hassan Kierstad, which like fine. I mean, he accomplishes something similar to what I just explained, but he's nowhere near, and that's an understatement, but he's nowhere near as impactful defensively or on the base pass as Cedric Mullins. But obviously, younger player, former, second overall pick in a draft. The Mariners and Jerry loves that kind of pedigree. He's, pre-arb, all that stuff. So Kierstad would be interesting for the Mariners, but I really like the idea of Mullins in a vacuum for the Mariners. I think he would actually be a really good fit for what they need right now.
Yeah, Kierstad, interesting guy, missed some time with illness and injury. You wonder what that looks like, trade package wise. You try and think, is there like another like hype prospect who got off to kind of a slow start, then kind of got blocked, who's been traded recently? I think Michael Busch kind of comes to mind. But I don't recall what Busch went for. I think he went for a couple of really solid but not elite prospects. So I don't know what that looks like from a Mariners equivalent, but I think if they could get Kierstad for that, then I think they'd probably consider that. I don't know if that's Ty Pete. I don't know if that's, if it's Michael Arroyo. I don't know what type of range the headliner is for that deal. But I think that would be a pretty interesting avenue. And, you could add a potential bat without increasing the payroll significantly. I think they'd probably be somewhat interested in that. With the Orioles, hard to say.
Yeah, the Cubs got Bush and Yency Almonte for Jackson Ferris. That was the deal.
Okay.
So, yeah. Jerry did say on Monday that they are still open to adding more. Obviously, we know how much money how little money they have to work with at this point. So that's obviously a very, very, very tight window to fit through. But also Hollander saying that he's been on the phone this morning. So maybe they still have another acquisition or two in them. We'll see.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean,
it's always possible you get that spring training trade. We saw one last year. Significant one.
Yep. And then we saw a pretty significant one like early-ish on in the season, the Urias deal.
Right. And there's still some, big free agents out there who tip the scales one way or another for players that we know the Mariners have already talked about. Is Casas available all of a sudden if Arenado goes to the Red Sox, Nico Hoerner, I don't know, if the Mets do re-sign Alonso, is Vientos available all of a sudden, blah, blah, blah. So if the Phillies get Arenado, does their price on Bohm go down? Could you sneak into a 3-team deal in the Arenado case and give the Cardinals some of the prospects that, some of these other teams probably don't want to give up for Arenado, and then you get a player back? Like, there's still a lot of things they can do and should explore. But just judging purely on this offseason, it doesn't seem like they're interested in trying to think outside the box at all.
That is kind of interesting because there's been some rumblings about Nolan Arenado this morning. I wonder if Hollander being on his phone this morning is maybe connected to that. I don't know. Just throwing that out there. All right. Well, that's going to do it for our show. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. For Colby Patnode, I'm Tidy Gonzalez. Be sure to give us a follow on Twitter at LO_Mariners. You can follow me at Tidy Gonzalez. Colby at CPAT11. That's CPAT11. We're also on Blue Sky. You can follow me at TDG. Colby at MLB Colby. And the show at Locked On Mariners. Have yourself a beautiful baseball day, and we'll see you next time. Peace.